What about children and the benefit system? I want to comment on the scale, the duration, and the role in poverty alleviation in looking at children and the benefit system. First, scale. These next two graphs are taken from the Children's Social Health Monitor prepared by the epidemiological group down at Otago University for the health system. It shows the percentage of children aged from 0 to 17 years reliant on benefit receipt. And this is a time series starting in 2000 and ending in 2009. And the different shades of blue represent different benefits. So you can see 27%, 28% or so in the year 2000 of children were in families at any point in time, or at the point in time when this data was collected, are in families dependent on an income-tested benefit. And in June 2009, it was just over 20%, perhaps 21% of children. So a significant number of children in New Zealand have been over the last decade dependent on the benefit system. This graph shows that dependency at one point in time, April 2009, by age. So you can see that the benefit-dependent population of children is skewed towards the underage group. In fact, the age of children most likely to be dependent on benefit is 1-year-olds, and that's almost 30%. I think the other thing that this shows is that the numbers are dominated by children on domestic purposes benefit. That's the rich blue line at the bottom, the block at the bottom are those dependent on domestic purposes benefit. So there's a lot of children in New Zealand dependent on benefits, and a lot of them are in households that are in receipt of a domestic purposes benefit. MSD research also tells us something about durations on benefit. This is just cross-sectional data, but there's been some research done in MSD. And that shows that of children born in 2001, a retrospective study of children born in 2001, some 5 or 6 years down the track, shows that 17% of those children spent 4 years or more of their first 5 years of life in a household dependent on an income-tested benefit. And looking at 15-year-olds, and again looking retrospectively back at the lives of 15-year-olds in New Zealand, the evidence, the data shows that 20% of those 15-year-olds, a fifth of those 15-year-olds, spent more than half of their first 13 years of life in a household dependent on a benefit. So this benefit system of ours has a big role to play in supporting children. And it's often, there's so much talk about the benefit system and the importance of moving people into work that it sometimes obscures the basic purpose of the benefit system to alleviate poverty, to protect adults and children in New Zealand from poverty, and it plays an enormous role in doing that for children in New Zealand. Being in this graph is just, this table just shows information though about the extent to which children are protected from being in income poverty as defined, or in hardship as defined in the earlier material that I presented. Being in a benefit dependent household or a household with no unpaid work does not lift all children, or even a majority of children, out of the income poverty as defined earlier in this presentation, and nor does it remove them out of that extreme hardship category. And the figures above show this. Children in working households are far less likely to be below the 60% after housing costs poverty line, and far less likely to be in the hardship group. So that's the second point I want to make. That's the importance of the benefit system as an income support for children, and the fact that while it protects them from some levels of poverty, it doesn't lift them out of poverty as defined here. Let me turn to work as a road to salvation. The figures that I presented do suggest that children in a working household are better off. MSD's analysis also shows how working for families has been important in significantly reducing rates of poverty and hardship for children in working households. Working households, beneficiary households, excuse the shorthand to describe what are important, complex organisations, households, but it's useful to distinguish the two groups. However, many children in working households remain in hardship. 50% of all children in hardship are in fact in families that have got some attachment to the labour market. And some third of children in income poverty are in families that are attached to the labour market. So there are arguments for changing work test requirements for sole parents on benefit. They partly rest on better outcomes for children because their material circumstances will improve. However, it's also obvious that that's no guarantee that material circumstances will improve. There's a significant proportion of children in our society who are in families with an adult in paid work, but who are still in income poverty or in material hardship. And that leads me to my final point, and that is whether we don't have an opportunity here for some sort of natural experiment. We do not know, I think, for sure what happens in New Zealand when families move from benefit into paid work. What happens to the material circumstances of children? One of our data gaps in New Zealand is that we have a lot of cross-sectional data, but not a lot of longitudinal data. The welfare reforms will see some parents move from benefit dependence to being in paid work when their children go to school, and some will not. I wonder if there's not the opportunity to track a cohort of families moving through that sort of process, of beneficiary families through that process, to see if in fact poverty and material hardship does reduce for those that move into paid work. It may be possible, so I'm suggesting that the officials who are looking at the evaluation of those welfare changes recently announced with the legislation going through Parliament now, consider whether in fact there isn't an opportunity to find some much better information than we currently have about whether the material circumstances of children improve when their parents get part-time work or get paid work, full-time paid work. And it may in fact be possible to look more directly at children's wellbeing using the before-school checks that this government thankfully has decided to continue, because those before-school checks look right across a range of domains of wellbeing for children, and have developed a set of instruments to check that could usefully be used in the evaluation that I'm suggesting officials should do. The before-school checks could in fact act as a sort of baseline for 4-year-olds about what the wellbeing of children in this set of families was, and then it could be applied later once parents had either remained on benefit or moved into paid work as a consequence of the welfare reforms. It's just an interesting thing to think about, finding better information than I've seen presented by anyone about the benefits of work, about work as the road to salvation for children. Given the number of children in households dependent on domestic purposes benefit in New Zealand, I think it's a very important question for us to ask, and having thrown out that idea, I'll finish this presentation. Thank you.